Chrisman.
I'm Gabriel Chrisman.
And today we're discussing The Woman's Exchange of Simpkinsville by Ruth McEnery Stuart. Now this one was published in 1893, and this is a fun story. Oh, it's such a cute story. It's so cute. This is the story of a family, but it's also the story of the revitalization and the recovery of the South after the 30 years after the American Civil War, a little less than 30 years after the American Civil War.
It's when a lot of the commemorations were starting to happen.
Yeah, so if you're watching this in a different country and you don't know that aspect of things, the American Civil War was 1861 to 1865. So the characters in this, they're a pair of twin sisters that it focuses on, and their family are the Simpkins, so they're living in a town that's named after them.
Right.
Their family before the war was very affluent, very genteel, and then in the course of the war they fell on hard times. And so now, almost 30 years later, these elderly twin sisters, they've never married, and they're scraping by. And the book begins when... so this was originally published as a serial.
In Harper's, I think?
I think it was Harper's,
yes.
Yeah. I think it was Harper's. And so at the start of the story, Harper and Brothers, yeah. So at the start of the story, they're just scraping by, barely making ends meet. And then their bank fails. So...
And 1893 was also the year that there were a lot of financial crises, mostly wrapped up in railroad companies.
Yeah, exactly. So this was going on all over. And so the story opens with them trying to discuss how they're going to make things work. And their first idea is to start a women's exchange. Now, women's exchanges were very, very big in the late 19th century. They were really cool. I've done another video on them. But
yeah, they were tied up with a lot of women's philanthropy and a lot of basically attempts of wealthier women to help poorer women and ways to create marketplaces for the sorts of goods that women created.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you want to know more about them, you can watch the video that I did about women's exchanges. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'll give you a very brief overview. Basically, in a women's exchange, women who were more affluent, better educated, would take care of the business management and clerical aspect of basically a bazaar.
And sometimes the sales aspects, too.
Yeah, and oftentimes the sales aspects of a bazaar that was for the purpose of selling things made by poorer women. So baked goods, handicrafts, lots of different things. Now, this was successful in the big cities. And when the reason it was successful in the big cities is that you had a large and diverse population, so you had a lot of people to sell things to. Small towns would hear about this, and they would hear about how successful it was in the big cities, and they would get really excited.
They would try to replicate it and then realize they didn't have the market. Right,
exactly. And so this is the story of exactly that happening. And so this is a story that would have been very, very familiar to...
Very relatable.
Very relatable to a lot of women in small towns in the late 19th century. And that's true of the North as well as the South.
Yeah.
And so when these two sisters start trying to run a women's exchange, first thing that happens is that all the women bring all their baked goods, and they just right away start sniping at, well, who made that? I wouldn't buy that. And, oh, well, she put too big of a price on that. Who does she think she is that she's going to get that much for that? I wouldn't pay that much for that. Mine is worth far more. Look at how much better mine is. And all of this sniping back and forth.
All of which was also very relatable, I'm sure.
Which I think will probably be relatable to a lot of modern women listening to this, honestly.
Yes.
And the end result of that is that nobody buys any of the fancy goods that were supposed to make money. All they buy is bread, because everyone had been spending their time making these fancy goods that they thought were going to make them a lot of money, and they didn't have time to make their own bread, so they just bought bread and went home. And so it sort of turns into a bakery, but then people stop spending all their time making fancy goods because they realize they're not selling, and so then it ceases to be a bakery. And so at that point, the sisters go, okay, now what are we going to do? And their next idea is to morph this into a hotel, because there are people coming and going on the road, and there's nowhere else for them to stay. So they say, okay, we're going to rent out our rooms in our old big house to people who are going to be passing through. Now, at this point, they have basically been in mourning ever since the war. So this is over 20 years later.
And these sisters never married.
These sisters never married. They are still wearing black every day.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in their house is still in mourning. It's still black and dour. Even their cat is all black. He's an all black tomcat. And so when they're trying to run a hotel, they look around and go, it's pretty dour in here. Do you think maybe it might be okay if we put just a little bit of white ruching on our dress? Would that be okay? And they're like, well, maybe, yeah, I think we could do that. And then they look at the cat and they're like, do you think maybe you could have a ribbon? Is that too much? Is that too flamboyant? They're like, no, he's a good cat. He deserves a ribbon. Let's put a ribbon on him. So they put the silk ribbon on their cat, and they put little fancier ruchings on their dress. So it's like they're coming out of mourning finally for this war that had destroyed the South. And then a group of men who they don't realize at first are from the Smithsonian stop and they stay at their house. And so the other thing that had gone on in previous years is these two sisters had a brother. He's passed away by the time the story opens. And by the way, part of the reason you know this is a comic story is that this family, the twins are Sari and Sophia, and the brother is Sonny, and their last name is Simpkins. So you have Sari, Sophia, and Sonny Simpkins.
Yes, which just sounds funny. And so
it's appropriate for a comic novel.
Right.
And so Sonny has passed away. He never really got a very lucrative job after the war. He was a nice guy, just sort of a gentle, easygoing guy who liked birds. He liked birds. He was a naturalist. He wound up falling out of a tree. That's how he died. But before that happened, he had collected over 3,000 birds that he stuffed. And he'd filled 5 diaries of information that he had observed about all these birds. And the sisters are lovingly taking care of all of these as a memory of the brother who they loved. And then the group from the Smithsonian comes and stays at their house, not realizing any of this. These guys from the Smithsonian, which is in Washington, D.C., and so this is in the north. This is Union territory. Maryland is it's its own thing, but
it got started in the 1840s, famously, but it really didn't get the ball rolling on really adding tons of collections until this era, in terms of really building up enough momentum and the Civil War being over, and now basically they're starting to look for collections.
Right. And so
here we go.
Yeah, and so this is a group of Yankees who come in, and they stay at this hotel run by these two sisters because it's the only place to stay. And then they see this collection, this amazing collection, which it just surpasses anything they've encountered before. And they're just gobsmacked by it. And they had come expecting to find, dumb yokels who were going to give them some crusts of crummy bread. And instead, they find this wonderful southern hospitality of these beautifully cooked foods.
Right.
And this amazing collection of fantastic birds that are beautifully preserved. And one of them actually does this whole little speech on what he had expected and then what they found. And so this is sort of a metaphor for the northern perception of the South at the time versus the South as it really was and as it was being revitalized.
Right, yeah.
And so it's a fun little metaphor in that way. And it's just a really cute story. And then the Smithsonian guys, and the sisters at first are just terrified that these Yankees are going to take their brother's birds because they were a memory of someone they loved. And they were, in the war, they had become accustomed to the Yankees just taking what they wanted.
But of course, in this case, it really becomes their economic salvation.
Right, because the Smithsonian group tells them, oh, no, we don't do that anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to make a display in the museum of your brother's birds with his portrait next to it, and we will pay you for the privilege of displaying his birds. And we wouldn't think of paying you less than $10,000, and it'll probably be at least double that. Now, in 1893 money, $10,000 is set for life for these two elderly sisters. Yeah. And so it's very much a happy ending, and it's just a really sweet story. Mm-hmm. It's a really sweet story. So yeah, if you can find a copy, they're hard to find.
Yeah, this one is not a remembered book.
It's not a remembered book, but if you can find a copy, it's worth a read. And I hope you'll check it out. Mm-hmm. Thanks for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up, and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!